Baruch Hashem, today's Daf Yomi is Zevachim Daf Yud Beis, Zevachim 12. His Daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim, it's all for the Shvuyim and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. In this eighth Tzara, we're going to start Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach on the Mishnah, at the Mishnah on Yud Aleph from the Beis, on 11b towards the bottom. The Mishnah says that Pesach Shachtu Shachris Ba'arba'asar Shalol Lishma. So we know that the Pesach is supposed to be brought on the afternoon of the 14th day of Nisan, but let's say this Pesach was slaughtered in the morning of the 14th day, and we know another halacha that a Pesach that's slaughtered Shalol Shmo, that's slaughtered with the wrong intent, if it's the proper time, it's disqualified, but if it's not the proper time, it becomes a shlamim. So his Pesach was slaughtered on the 14th day in the morning with the wrong intent. Rabbi Yeshua says it's malcher. He says it's kosher, because he says it's not the proper time. So it says dough was slaughtered on the 13th day and therefore become a shlamim. Or as Ben Beseira says, posel ki'ilu nishcha bein arbaim. No, it's disqualified because it says dough is slaughtered in the afternoon, the proper time, with the wrong intent, and then it becomes not kosher. Amar Shimon ben Azai, Mekuba ani mipi shivim v'shnayim zakin. Says I have a tradition from 72 zakin, elder. Biyom shel shivu as Rabbi Eliezer b'yeshiva. On the day that they established Rabbi Eliezer to be the Rosh Yeshiva, shekol Zevachim anechol, that all the sacrifices that are eaten, shenizbehu shaloshman, which were brought with the wrong intent, are ksherin, they're kosher, but they don't fulfill their obligation. Chutz min Pesach min achatas, with the exception of the Paschal lamb and the sin offering. Hosif ben Azai. So what is ben Azai including? Ola, because the ola is not eaten. So that's like the Pesach and the chatas. Mahodu chacham, the chacham did not agree to him. So Amar Rabbi Lazar, Zakta Gemara. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Shaya. Mekasher haya ben Beseris. Remember when Ben Beseris' position was that for slaughtered on the morning with the wrong intent, he's going to say it's disqualified because it says, though you slaughtered it on the afternoon of Pesach, meaning to say it's the proper time, but the wrong intent, proper time and the wrong intent is disqualified. So says Rabbi Lazar in the name of Rabbi Shaya, that Ben Beseira would say it's kosher, the Pesach shachtu shachas ba'arba'asar lishmo. But if you did shachtu lishmo on the morning of the 14th, Ben Beseira would say it's kosher. Why? Dekul yoma zimnehu. So, because he says really the whole day is okay. And if that's the case, why does it use the language of ki'ilu? It says, though you slaughtered it on the 14th in the afternoon. To Amar Rabbi Yeshua, my ki'ilu. I did Amar Rabbi Yeshua ki'ilu. Since Rabbi Yeshua said it's kosher in the morning because it says, though you slaughtered on the 13th. Ihunami, Amar ihunami ki'ilu. So therefore, Ben Beseira also used the language of ki'ilu. Amar has a problem with that answer of Rabbi Shaya. If that's the case, why do they argue about a carbon that was slaughtered with the Pesach, that was slaughtered with the wrong intent, where on the morning of the 13th, and Beseira says it's not good, and Rabbi Yeshua says it's kosher? They should argue about a case where it was the right intent. Let them argue about a case where it was the right intent. That Ben Beseira would say it's kosher, and Yeshua would say it's not kosher. Says no, because if they argue about where you had the right intent on the morning of the 13th, I would have thought, but if they had slaughtered on the morning of the 13th, Modi Rabbi Yeshua, then Rabbi Yeshua would admit to Ben Beseira that it's no good. Why? Since part of the day is okay for bringing the Pesach that day. So the argument is that, so therefore it proves that they argue in both cases. Gemara says, but why? Meaning to say, so the Gemara says, the Gemara asks Rabbi Oshaya, how could he say that Pesach, the time for the Pesach is in the morning? How could he say that in the morning is the time for the Pesach, and therefore Ben Beseira says it's okay in the morning? How could that be? Doesn't it say Bein Arbaim, that the Pesach has to be brought in the afternoon? Bein Shnei Aravim. No, it means Bein Shnei So what it means is bein shnei arbayim. It means between the two arbayim, between the 13th in the evening and the 14th evening is when you have to bring it. If that's the case, says the Gemara, Tamid dilchsev bein arbayim, about the daily offering. It says bein arbayim. Would you say the afternoon tamid could also be brought in the morning? We say that the afternoon tamid could also be brought in the morning. Where it says no, hasam there, the context proves that it means in the afternoon. Midilchsev es hakeves echad taseh baboker. In fact, it says one sheep in the morning. We call the bein arbayim. So when it says the other tamid is in the afternoon, it means bein arbayim mamish. It means the actual afternoon. Ema, Gemara says, but maybe chad baboker ida kol yom. Maybe the first one can be brought in the morning, the other one can be brought the whole day. Gemara says, no, we don't want to say that. Echa baboker. Gemara says because it says echa baboker because it says tamid achad that one tamid. It's a keseh sheni taseh ben baboker. So it says one in the morning, so not two. So that's the implication. Neiros, what about the candles of the menorah? They'll say bein arbayim. It says that about the candles. You have to light the candles bein arbayim. Would you also say there also hachinami de kol yoma kosher? We say the whole day is kosher for those candles. Gemara says no. Shani also in that case is different because it says may erev haboker. It says you have to light the candles from evening until morning. V'tanya may erev haboker, and we have or in the Brayso said telam midas shetei delachas olachas may erev haboker. You have to give it enough oil that it lasts from evening until the morning. So the davar acher, alternatively, and the bride says there's no other avodah that's kosher from evening until morning until this by itself. So we see it's in the evening. The Gemara says, but what about the fact that by the ketoras, by the incense, it also says in the evening, ketoras talsiv bein arbayim, in the afternoon, hachinami de kol yoma kosher. Would you say also there the whole day is kosher for the ketoras? Gemara says no. Shani ketoras, the case of the ketoras is different. The itgish laneros because that's comparable to the candles or on the top of 12a. Well, hasam nami ksiv, but the Gemara now says, but also by the candles, it says in the Erev at Boker. So, and Hasam Namiksiv, and also by the Pesach, it's written Sham Tizbach Pesach Ba'erev. So it says by the Pesach, you should also slaughter it in the evening. And so therefore, Bein Arbayim, it says by Pesach, maybe it means only in the afternoon, like it explained, like we say by the Neros and the Ketoras. No, why does it say Sham Tizbach Pesach Ba'erev? Ha'uli Uchar Davar. That means to say that the Pesach should come after the Korban Tamid, after the daily offering. And even though the whole day, ironically, even though the Pesach, Boker Tov, are on the top of 12a, even though the whole day is kosher for the Pesach, if it came to the time where the afternoon offering is brought, i.e. 6.5 hours of the day, then at that point, you have to do the Tamid before the Pesach. The Tanya, because we weren't in the Brayso, we're third line from the top on 12a. Yuchar davar shenemar bo yuchar davar, that the Pesach is later than the Korban Tamid. How do we know this? Shenemar bo ba'erev, because it says the words ba'erev by the Pesach, and it also says bein arbayim. So that means davar shel nemar bo ela bein arbayim bovad. The Korban Pesach has the word Erev and has the word Bein Arbayim, and the Korban Tamid only has the word Bein Arbayim. So the Pesach will come after the Bein Arbayim. So the Korban Tamid in the afternoon on the eve of Pesach is brought at 6.5 hours of the day, which we call Mincha Gedola, and that's the source for the idea that we could daven Mincha at 6.5 hours of the day. But because on Erev Pesach, or on Erev Leil Seder, the Korban Pesach is brought after the Tamid. Gemara says, wait, so according to Ben Beseira, you want to say that if he slaughtered it in the morning, Amris Zimnehu, that's the proper time for the Korban Pesach. But suddenly, once the afternoon comes, Amris Yuchar Davar, then you say that no, at that point, it can only be brought after the Korban Tamid. Gemara says, yeah, actually, that's exactly what we're saying. In Now, I'm a Rabbi Yochanan, and this is halacha mispal shal mincha, that even though mincha musaf can be said in the morning, and mincha can only be said after 6.5 hours a day, Rabbi Yochanan taught that first you daven mincha v'akach mispal shal musaf, and that if musaf and mincha overlap, first you daven mincha and then musaf. So that's the teaching of Rabbi Yochanan. So it's because, well, either way you're delaying a mitzvah, but it's because tadir v'she'eno tadir kodem. Tosfos and other commentaries point out, wait 1 second, what do we do on Yom Kippur? Because in Yom Kippur, we oftentimes extend the musaf till after 6.5 hours of the day. And we don't daven musaf before mincha. So it's a classic question. One of the answers to this question is that, one of the answers to this question is that when it's a community and we're not worried that you're going to miss it, so then that it's only when a person's praying in private, individually. But when it's a community, this law doesn't apply. That's one of the answers that's given. So then the Gemara says, Ubein arbaim dersiv gabe ketoros v'neros lamoy. So why does it say bein arbaim, by the ketoros, by the incense, and also by the candles? Meaning to say, this doesn't teach us about the time of the lighting and the burning, because according to Ben Beseira, Ben Arbayim means the whole day. So therefore, we need another time to teach us that it's in the evening. So why does it say Ben Arbayim? And furthermore, we have another teaching, Ve'od Heishiv Rebbe Tachas Ben Beseira, the Divrei Rabbi Yeshua, that Rebbe stood in the place of Ben Beseira and responded to Rabbi Yeshua. Remember, Rabbi Yeshua said that if you in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yeshua said that if you bring the Pesach in the morning of the 14th with the wrong intent, Rabbi Yeshua says it's kosher, because the morning of the 14th is like the day of the 13th, because it's not the time of the Pesach. So Rabbi responded to Rabbi Yeshua. He said, no. He said the 14th in the morning is not the same as the 13th, because part of the 14th in the morning is going to be kosher. The 14th day is kosher for the Pesach. And so therefore, if your wrong intent is on the morning of the 14th, it should be disqualified, like Ben Beseira said. So, Vim Isa, and if it's the case, like Rabbi Shaya was explaining Ben Beseira's position, Kulo Raihu, he should have said, no, the whole day of the 14th is okay, according to Ben Beseira. And so therefore, we should slaughter Pesach that's brought for the wrong reason. So therefore, we have a different explanation of Ben Beseira. Remember, Rabbi Hoshaya's explanation of Ben Beseira was that not only is it okay if it's brought, that not only is it disqualified if you bring it Shalom Lishmo on the morning of the 14th, but it's also okay if you brought the Pesach Lishmo, because the morning of the 14th is also the Zman of the Pesach. So he says, so therefore, comes along Rabbi Yochanan, he says, no, I don't agree with that explanation of Ben Beseira that Rabbi Shaya gave. Elmer Rabbi Yochanan, Hoso Haya Ben Beseira, Pesach Shashachtu Barbas or Shachar Spain Lishmo Bein Shalom Lishmo. He says, no, my understanding of the Mishnah is that, yeah, if you slaughtered at Shalom Lishmo on the morning of the 14th, Ben Beseira says it's possible, but even if you slaughter at Lishmo on the morning of the 14th, it's disqualified. Meaning to say, since Hol Mikzaso Roy, since part of that day is capable of bringing the carbon Pesach, so therefore, if you slaughtered it on the morning of the 14th with the improper intent, it's going to be disqualified. And also, if you slaughtered it with the right intent, it's also going to be disqualified, because it's not the time of the Pesach. But since it's partially the time of the Pesach, also if you slaughter with the wrong intent, it's disqualified. So Megadev Ba Rabbi Avo was very upset. In Cain, if that's the case, Pesach kosher with Ben Beseira, how can you ever have a kosher Pesach according to Ben Beseira? Ida Afreshe, if you're going to separate it on the morning of the 14th, it's going to be immediately pushed off, because at the beginning it was consecrated. And so, but at that point, you couldn't bring it at all, because it was not the time of the 14th. It was not, the morning is not okay. And so therefore you couldn't bring it. So if you consecrate on the morning of the 14th, it's immediately pushed off. And if you separate the day before, it's also going to be a problem because Nira, at that point, it was capable of being brought. And then it got pushed off. And that's also disqualifying. Elam Rabbi Avo. So Rabbi Avo would say, what do you have to do? You can only consecrate your Pesach on the afternoon when it's the proper time to bring it. The afternoon of the 14th. So then the Gemara says, Abai Amar, no, Abai disagrees with Rabbi Avo. He says, even if you want to say in the morning that you could consecrate it. Why? Even though it's that day and you can't bring it, it's not called mechusar zman. It's not called like the carbon is pushed off, because since that day is ultimately able to be brought, we don't extend that period called mechusar zman to that morning. Rav Papa says, no, even the night before, it's not going to be a problem. Because the night before is not going to be considered what it's called mechusar zman. And so therefore, even the night before. So the Gemara says, and I'll prove to you, the Tani debei Rabbi Shmuel, Rav Papa has a proof because Rabbi Shmuel taught, well, Shmini nichnas ladir. So we know that an animal cannot be brought the first 7 days after it's born. It cannot be slaughtered. And the night of the 8th day, going into the 8th day, you can put it in your pen, hit aser, and you could count it as part of the tithes. You could Rebbe Aptoraki, another unusual name for Zevachim. Rebbe Aptoraki Ramiksiv. He threw two verses against each other. It says, 7 days it needs to be with its mother. Halayla meaning to say that the night of the after 7th, it's okay. Because of the 8th day, it could be brought as a korban. So we see from here that the night is not capable of being brought. Hold on one second. Hold on one second. So the Gemara says, okay, so how do we, so okay, it said, how do we understand this? So we say, Laila Kedusha, the night it can be sanctified, Ubiyom Artzah, the next day it's capable of being brought. So we see from here the Laila is not considered like it's not the proper time. Got a question? So no, so he's saying that even if you consecrate it at night, when you can't bring it yet, it's not called mechutzer zman because it's leading into that day. So it wouldn't be rejected. Exactly. Amalei Rabbi Zeri, Rabbi Avo, Lema Kasav Rabbi Yochanan, Baalei Chaim Nidachin. So maybe we can prove from here that Rabbi Yochanan's other position, that even though it's a living animal, it's still able to be pushed off from being brought as a korban. Amalei in, he says, yes, that's Rabbi Yochanan's position. Amar Rabbi Yochanan behema shel shnei shutfin. Let's say you have an animal of two partners, siktish chatzia, v'chazar v'laka chatzia. Let's say you have an animal belongs to two partners. One of them consecrated, so it can't be brought as a korban because it's only one of them. V'chazar v'laka chatzia, and then the other, and then he brought the second half, vikdisha, kedusha ve'ena kreva. It's consecrated, but it cannot be brought because it was pushed off. And the other halacha we learn is va'osa temura, and yet it can also be made into a temura. It could be an exchanged animal, which is prohibited, but if you do it, it takes effect, and the other second animal gets the sanctity of the first. U'temurasa kayotzibra, and the second animal has the same halacha as the first one, meaning it can't be brought. Shema mina tla. So we learn three things. Shema mina. We learn from here three things. Shema mina ba'achayim nidachim, that even though it's a living creature, it could be pushed off from being brought as a korban. And from the outset, it could be pushed off. And we also learn from here that even though it only has a value, monetary value, it can also be pushed off. We're on top of 12b. So we're going to see other circumstances of where we have this prohibition of carbon was pushed off and therefore disqualified. Let's say a person ate chalev, which is this prohibited fat, which you have to bring a chatas for, the hifrish carbon, and he separated the carbon, the hamir, and then he became an apostate, the hamir das, and now he repented. Since the animal was pushed off from being a kosher carbon once he was a heretic, because the heretic can't bring the carbon. So therefore from that point, so there it's pushed off. In similar, carbon. Let's say he ate the chalev, he separated the carbon and became insane. He's not of sound mind. He can't bring the carbon. The chazer v'nishtapa, and then he repented. We say then he became not repented. He became of sound mind. Since he became of sound mind, he's of sound mind. We need both cases. Because if we only had the first case, we would say Mishum Davidachi Navshe Biyadayim. On the first case, we need to say that maybe there it's considered a dichoy of the carbon because he pushed it off with his hands. But in the case where it became insane, maybe it's not considered to be dichoy because it's like he's sleeping, and when we're sleeping, our carbon doesn't become disqualified. Yes, and if we only had the case of insanity, we would say Mishum De'im Biyado Achzor. Well, maybe it's pushed off there because he doesn't have it within his ability. He didn't have medicine back then to cure mental illness, so maybe De'im Biyado Achzor. He didn't have the ability to change his position. But the Mumar De'im Biyado Achzor, maybe since he always has the ability to repent, maybe it's not considered dichoy. So by Rabbi Yirmiyah, now Rabbi Yirmiyah has a different question. Carbon. So this takes us back to Horios, that if the Bezdin ruled that it was permitted, and you ate the carbon, then since the Bezdin ruled, and you ate the chelav, then since the Bezdin ruled that way, you don't bring the chatas. So what happened here? He ate the chelav, so he would have to bring the chatas. We hit fresh carbon. Then the whole Bezdin shechelav mutter, but then the court ruled that the chelav is permitted, so therefore he doesn't have to bring the chatas. And now the court changed its mind. Mao, do we say mi avidichoy or lo avidichoy? Is that considered dichoy or not? So Amar Leah, who's Saba? So there was a Saba there, and he said, "Well, actually, Kipasach Rabbi Yochanan Midichuyan Mehapasach." This is the paradigmatic case that Rabbi Yochanan would begin this discussion with. My time, Ahasam Gaver Itli Carbon Lo Itli. There, the person in all the previous cases, it was the person himself was Itli. That's not the real decoy. But here, the carbon Nami Itli. Here, the carbon itself was Itli. So that's the question that he would start with and say that it is for sure no good. Amar Shimon ben Azi mikublani mipi Shimon v'shnayim zakin. So Lamali lamisni Shimon v'shnayim zakin. Why does it say 72 zakin? So here on the daf, the commentaries say that the question is that it says zakin and not the zakinim. Elsewhere, others say no. The question is that it says why specifically 72. So he says the reason is the kula b'chada shita savikamim. All of them were in the same position that all the sacrifices that were slaughtered shalol lishma are ksherim, but they did not fulfill their owner's obligation except for the pesach and the chatas. So then the Gemara says lo sif ben azai ella ola. So what did Ben Azai add on to the position of the chachamim, which was that the ola also was not kosher in addition to the Pesach and the Chatas because it's not eating. Amar Funa my time at the Ben Azai. What's the reason why that Ben Azai says that Ola Shalom Lishma is not kosher? Because Ola hu Ishay Reach Nichocha Hashem. It says in the pasuk it is an Ola and Ishay Reach Nichocha Hashem. He Lishma Kshira. So from the fact it says who, it means if it's Lishma it's Kshira, Shalom Lishma is Psula. Now Lishma is Psula. The Gemara says Asham Nami Ksiv who. By the Asham also it's written the word who. No, the Gemara says no. By the Asham the word who is, we already had this Gemara earlier. It says Hahu Achar Aktar Simurim. Who they'll say that who is after the Aktar Simurim, after the Amurim, which itself is not essential, so it's clearly not disqualifying it. So the Gemara says, but Hai Nami by also by Ola Achar Aktar Simurim, and it's also written after the Aktar Simurim. The Gemara says no. Trey Hu Ksivi. No, it says twice the word who by an ola. One to tell us by the Oas Nadava, and one by the El of the Shivas Yimei Melurim. And even though both of them are after that Torah Murim, the second who is to tell us about the Psul of Ul Shema. So Gemara says, Gabi Hashem Nami Trei Huksiva. Also by the Hashem is twice it says who. Ela Ben Azeh Bekavachomer Maisa. So Ben Azeh going down for Kavachomer. Machatas, Sheina Kulio, Shechatas, Shlo Shema Psula, just like a Chatas, which is not burnt. If you slaughtered Shlo Shema, it's disqualified. Ola She Kulio Kolshkin. For sure the Ola is disqualified if it's entirely burnt. The Gemara says, but Malachatas Shechem Chaparos, but the Chatas provides atonement. The Ola doesn't. So Pesach Yochiach. But so the Pesach proves it because it doesn't provide atonement and it's disqualified. But Mala Pesach Shkein Zman Kavur, but Pesach there's a fixed time we have to bring it. Chatas Tochiach, Chazar Din or Rizek, what's the Tzadish Shavash? And the common denominator of the Ola of the Chatas and the Pesach is Shein Kachim v'Shachtan Shlosh Shema Pasal, because they're both Kachim and Shach and Shlita Shlosh Shema disqualifies them. Afanevi Ola She Kachim v'Shachtan Shlosh Shema Pasula. So to include the Ola. The Gemara says, but they have a different common denominator. Mal Tzadish Shavash Ben. Sheyesh Ben Tzad Karis, both the Pesach and the Chatas have Karis associated with it. Well, Ben Azai Tzad Karis Lo Parach. He says, no, I don't agree with that because they don't have the same type of Karis. Because the Chatas comes for a Karis for having made a mistake, where the Pesach comes for a Karis if you don't bring it. So it's different enough that he doesn't bring a proof from that. Gemara says, well, Asham Nami Laisi. The Gemara says, well, if according to Ben Azai, we don't have this question of a kares, well, if that's the case, and Asham also that should also be disqualified from the same things, and it shares the same thing as kachem like the Pesach, it's kachem like the Pesach and the Chatas. Gemara says, no. Asham parach ma'at tzad shemesh b'em sheishken tzibur kibiyachad. So the Asham is different because the Asham, because the Pesach and Chatas are both communal offerings. Even though the Pesach is an individual offering, since the whole community brings it, it's like a communal offering. Ibai same, or else alternatively, he does question Tzad Ben Azai Tzad Karas Nami Parach Ben Azai Gemara Gamira. He is bothered by that question about the Karas, but he has a tradition that the Ola is disqualified. Amar Ravuna Kavachomer, when Ravuna said Kavachomer, he wasn't being precise. He's just trying to sharpen the matter, make the matter more precise in our minds and in his students' minds, but it's not literally. Really, he just has a tradition. Okay, so this is today's daf. We'll stop the recording. Baruch Hashem. We say to